Hi there. My name is Jake Wiskerchen. I'm a Walk the Talk America board member. I'm also a marriage and family therapist and national certified counselor. I want to tell you a little story about how I came into this community, or rather, how the community brought me out of where I was, which was closeted, in a word. So, for many years, I've hosted a podcast called Noggin Notes. We deal with mental health subjects and try to keep it evergreen and upbeat and positive and encouraging. And one day I met Mr. Michael Sodini and had him on the podcast. But before we talked about the podcast stuff, I said, hey, we can talk all about your organization, what you're doing with mental health and firearms and all that stuff. But please don't mention that I'm a concealed carrying practitioner because I'm going to get in trouble with some of my peer colleagues. And as the words were coming out of my mouth, I realized how ridiculous it sounded. And several days later, after that recorded podcast, I realized that I couldn't sit in the shadows anymore if I was going to be maximally effective in this effort. Now, you might be asking, well, what was the obstacle? What was the barrier to me owning both roles, right? Well, come to find out, I reflected on this and I did some heavy consideration. I realized that for several years as a licensed practitioner, a lot of the communities in which I ran, the supervision groups, the conferences, the committees, the boards, the coalitions, the things I was a part of, there would be snarky, snotty little comments made about gun owners in the wake of a gun violence incident. And I thought, well, why are you guys talking like this? You know, I'm sitting right here next to you, right? But they didn't. I had self censored because I myself didn't want to be subject to that ridicule. So I just kept my opinions to myself. No one knew that I owned guns. No one knew that I was a concealed carrier. They just thought that I was in part of their inner circle. And apparently, we all share the same opinions as though we're some kind of monolith in this therapeutic community. And we're not. So I stepped forward and I realized that I had to bridge the gap myself. And that's what Walk the Talk America is trying to do, is bridge the gap between the two cultures. Now, my invitation is twofold. One, if you're a practitioner who owns guns, please step forward, advertise yourself, because there's a whole bunch of gun community members who need therapy and don't think that there's anybody like them in our field. The second part is, if you're a practitioner who holds these sort of hostile opinions about such things, the first thing I do is ask you to reconsider. Gun owners are not a monolith either. And the second thing is, consider that with your hostile opinions, you're probably putting people off of getting services, which then makes things worse. They end up not coming into care, and then we end up with things like firearm suicide or violence perpetrated upon others with firearms. So please check your opinions, check your egos. Make sure that you're actually truly being warm, welcoming, extending unconditional positive regard, and non judgment. After all, about 50% of Americans either own a gun or live with one, which means if you look to your right and your left, and if it's not you, it's one of those two people. You don't want to be pushing them away from care. Thanks for listening. I appreciate it.